everybody. Welcome to Curious Coaches Club. My name is Nick Levitt. I'm head of coaching for UK Coaching, and we'll be steering the ship today as we have two excellent guests with us that will be doing most of the talking. And as we kind of move through those shifting sands of time through lockdown, and we head to something a little bit normal, this is a perfect time really to get into one of these topics. And as you can see from the slides, please make sure that your microphone is muted. Please make sure your chat box is set to everybody and ensure that your video is turned off. It's not that we don't want to see people, it's just purely because the likes of bandwidth, it always helps with that. And 2 weeks ago, we had somebody shouting "Poppy" very loudly in the background as someone was enjoying homeschooling, and we all got to hear about it. So please make sure microphone off, chat box is set. Please make sure you get involved on the chat box as well. So today we have Andy Bradshaw, who is senior coach developer, as you can see there, just in his nursery with a giraffe over his shoulder, a view I'm getting used to now. And we're also delighted to welcome with us Alan Keane today as well. And I'm not going to steal either of their thunder and explain who they are, because I'm going to ask both of them to do that. But the topic today is all about growing and really making sure that you can maximize the use of your network. It's a really interesting topic that we don't think people typically do very well, and it's something that we could all do better. And I'm sat here today as host for this, but I'm absolutely a learner on this as well, because it's something I am not very good at. So I'm excited to learn a lot from this session as well. So for people that don't know you, Alan and Andy, it'd be great if you could just give us the shortened, potted history of your coaching journey, just to give people a bit of a flavour of who you are and what you've done. So let's start with Alan as the main guest for the day. Over to you.
Hi, Nick. Thank you very much for having me on here. It's been an absolute privilege to be asked to do this. I've thoroughly enjoyed your previous episodes. Particularly Joey Barton's one really stood out to me. So I appreciate it. It's a privilege to be on. But my background is in basketball. I'm currently the Great Britain under-20 head coach, and I've spent about 10 years as a junior national team assistant coach / head coach. I also coached at an academy program in Reading with John Majeski Academy, which is a player pathway for like 16 to 19-year-olds. So a lot of those guys will come to us from around the country, some from overseas, and do residential with us while doing their A-levels or B-Techs. And they all come with the aspiration that they want to play in the States or get to the next level. And believe it or not, I also coach another team. I coach the Reading Rockets Division 1 men's team. So it sounds like I'm juggling a lot, but they're all tied together really well. So the national team is very much in the summer, European Championships, out of season, out of club season. And then during the season, our academy program and our Division 1 men's program, which has 7 full-time professional players, they're fused together quite well. So there's a lot of overlap there that allows me to do it. So that would be it in a nutshell, really, Nick.
Wow. I'm not sure how you find the time for anything else on top of that, let alone maximizing your own network, because that's a fairly full-on program there. But yeah, fantastic. And we'll definitely get into some of that and how that's kind of grown and shaped for you as we go through. Andy, many people will know you as the voice of Coach Developer Conversations and leading a lot of that area of work. But you're also a coach in your own right. So tell us a bit about that as well.
Yes, coaching wise, hockey predominantly. So started in coaching probably 20 plus years ago, coming out of university in Sheffield, through sports development coaching, local schools, and then progressed on to age group coaching within the England setup. So I've coached from under 16 to under 21, boys and girls, head coach, assistant coach. So that's been my journey in hockey. More recently have transferred over and done some girls football coaching. So my eldest daughter, now 14, As with all of these things, people were looking to parents to help out, and there's a little bit of transferable skill from some of my hockey stuff to football. So I've done a couple of seasons supporting a girls' football team in the local Sheffield League. So that's been an interesting, different approach. We went through almost an entire season without winning a game. We drew the last one. So yeah, very different, but differently challenging and very, very enjoyable. So that's me.
Brilliant, thank you. So the plan for today's session, you can see just popping up on screen here. We'll start with the who around the first half. So who are the key people that you might need to think about including within your network? And we'll very much start in the second half to get into the how and how we go about that. And we'll certainly be jumping between Andy and Alan and their experiences of how they've gone about doing this in their own kind of unique ways. At the end of the session, we'll get to the chance to kind of open it up for a bit of more of a formal Q&A and also to share some of their own kind of personal views on some other bits. However, we've got the chat box on the right-hand side there. Please make sure you use the little chat icon, which is the speech bubble. Anything you want, we'll try and pick up as we go along. If it's relevant to the conversation, we're comfortable to go off on a bit of a diversion and a tangent if we need to pick up anything in the chat box as well. So please feel free to throw things in there, and other things we'll try and pick up in the conversation at the end. So one of the things I think that's always relevant for coaches that are kind of setting out on their journey and a bit more new to the coaching world is we all start kind of panicking about coaching ideas and thinking that we don't know enough practices or games to try and encourage the kids to get better. And I'm interested to know a little bit really about the kind of places that you two went for those coaching ideas when you were more of a novice coach compared to your experiences now, and how that may have shifted as you've got a bit more experience within your coaching.
Okay, I'll jump in first. So Andy, on that one, Nick. I think early on, you know, if I go back to when I first started coaching, or even not too long ago, Nick, either it could be as recent as 5 or 6 years ago. It might even be a lot sooner than that, where I was very much, when I look back now, I would describe it as probably hoarding stuff, like trying to gain, like I was really enthusiastic, and I still am. I've got the same level of enthusiasm, but I think I'm actually using it better, you know. And so the enthusiasm is still there to learn more, and a thirst and a hunger and a desire to get better. And to steal from you, to steal from anybody, to steal from people, I think I can learn from. But what I've done better recently is I've molded it into a system that works for me, where I can retain the information. So, for example, at the moment, you've got a lot of online clinics going on, a lot of online webinars, and it's amazing. It's really amazing how much people are sharing right now. And you know, I think one of the dangers I would have fallen, one of the traps I would have fallen into 5 years ago is I would have tried to watch as much as I could. I'd probably watched 5 or 6 clinics a day if this was 5 or 6 years ago. Where now I feel like I'm watching probably 5 a week, 3 or 4 a week. And what's worked for me is understanding where I'm at. What's my baseline? Like, who am I as a coach? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? You know, I've had a lot of people that have supported me to help me to develop my self-awareness. And where I'm at in my journey, and be comfortable with that as well, you know, because I guess when you go down that road and you hold up the mirror in front of your face and you're honest with what you see, I guess sometimes it can be a bit soul destroying. You might not be as good as you thought you are. Maybe you're better than you think you are, but I think I don't think often from my perspective, there was a disparity between, when I look back at myself 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago, there was a disparity between what I thought I was and what I actually was as a coach. And that came from a lack of experience. That was just inexperience. It was nothing else. It wasn't ego. It was a case of I didn't know what I didn't know. So throughout that, and I think you have to go through that, Nick. I think you have to hoard stuff. I think you have to get through a stage where I want all the best drills that are out there. I want to know about this coaching philosophy. I want to know about that tactic. I want to know about this technique. I think you have to go through that to come out of it, and then be able to kind of filter all that stuff in the right direction. But for me, it's understanding your baseline, where you're at as a coach, what do you need to improve, because otherwise you end up with a cosmetic approach to too many things, and you get a surface level understanding of things, you know. So we hear a lot about connection and relationships and all that stuff with players, but actually when you ask a coach, when you dig down into that, well, how do you facilitate that? How do you build that? What does that truly look like? You know, you can find yourself stumbling for the answer because it's you haven't thought about it in depth that much. You just know that it's important, so now it's important for you. But actually, how do you bring that to life, and how do you keep it alive in different contexts with different people under different circumstances? I mean, you're looking at a year-long journey of getting it wrong before you get it right potentially. So for me, I think what I'm doing better these days, Nick, is I'm compartmentalizing my journey better and the stages I need to go through to take that next step. So for me right now, the level I coach at, some might say at, you know, guys who are on my level or a bit more experienced, who've had experience I've had or a bit more, might say that it's not as tactically challenging as it could be. So if I want to coach at a higher level in 5 years' time, which I do, I'm currently investing a lot of time in tactics that won't necessarily benefit me right now with my teams, but actually they will in 5 years' time. So my mindset at the moment is I'm developing a tactical base or a tactical platform right now where I'm not going to use it next season with my team, but I hope to be in a position where I can use it in 5 years' time. So I think it's developing that level of self-awareness.
Andy, do you think you kind of went through that process as well as a bit of a hoarder? And have you almost kind of gone back to being something like that now that you're a bit more of a novice grassroots football coach?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think my journey was one that I'm sure hopefully other people will connect with in terms of probably focusing a lot on the what first. So, you know, my hockey journey was fairly linear in terms of coach education, in terms of doing a level 2, moving on to a level 3, and was fortunate enough then to move on to a higher level, a level 4, which was linked in with other sports. But going through, you know, in my earlier years, you know, the majority of people that I connected with and content that I engage with was around just the what to coach. It was very technically focused, and it was very skills focused, and it was very hockey. You know, the bulk of the reading and the connecting that I make in my world now and over the past probably 5 or 6 years has been with other sports. Now I know that I'm fortunate enough to work in a role where that happens, but I've also, outside of work role, connected with other people and be reading about learning, full stop, whether not learning in hockey, but actually just how do people learn, how do they learn effectively, how can I support that learning. So that would be a sort of a massive sort of shift change in terms of the type of content that I'd be looking to access, and then who might I connect with. Just, you know, some things that have come up in conversations that we've had over the past couple of weeks. What type of webinars are you accessing? Is it just stuff that is reinforcing areas that you've already worked on before, or are you looking to stretch yourself? Are you looking outside of your sport or outside of your domain? So bits that I would look at now as well. How does teaching impact what we do in coaching, and vice versa? But those are things that I'd be in terms of some of the shifts from an inexperienced coach to a more experienced coach.
And I'm interested for both of you then. So the 80 odd people on here today, what was the moment for you that you then kind of thought, the coaching process is more than just the X's and O's in your worlds, and I have to start to understand a bit more about people and connection that you mentioned, Alan. What were the kind of the moments really that you thought, right, I need to start to understand that a bit more, and therefore this is who and where I should go for that kind of information?
I've had a few of those moments, Nick. There's been a couple of key checkpoints for me. One was actually my partner, Esther, who was a GB gymnast in her performance days. And she came and watched me coach against Sweden on the 16 national team in a pre-European preparation tournament. And, you know, we had a 3-game series, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And she came up for the Sunday game, and we won the game. And this has gone back about 8, 9, 10 years. And we were driving back home, and you know, she was fairly quiet in the car, and you know, and I was buzzing because I thought I did a great job. We beat Sweden. I'm a great coach. So all that natural feelings will kick in. It's not ego, it's just naturally who we are. We won, so we're happy.
Yeah, happiness.
And I think I did a great job. And she said something to me that has stuck with me ever since. And it was definitely a benchmark to where my shift started. She said to me, I don't think you understand I think you're losing sight of how young these kids are. And these were like under 16 basketball players. Now, if you think about our under 16 national team, we had two guys who weren't far off 7 foot tall. You know, the average height was around 6'4". When you see me, I'm 5'11". When you see me in a team picture, I look tiny, and there's quite comical actually sometimes. And I tell people, yeah, they're 15 years old, and go, wow. But so they're built strong. These are really strong athletes.
Yeah.
And you know, I was coaching them. When I look back at it now, I was coaching them quite hard. You know, I was very, very verbal, very emotional at times for sure, very demanding in a very dictatorial way. And you know, when she said to me, I think you're forgetting how old these players are, and I think you're forgetting the impact you might be having on them with your voice and your body language and how you're coaching them. And her message was like, your intention's right. There's nothing wrong with your intention. She didn't use those words, but that was the message. Like, your intention is in the right direction, but don't forget you're coaching kids. They're people, they're humans, and they have feelings, and you're the custodian of how those feelings will go one way or the other, kind of thing. And that was the first point. The second thing that had the biggest influence was I undertook a master's in European basketball coaching science, is the full name of it, with Worcester University. They're in conjunction with Lithuanian School of Physical Education. Okay. And that 3-year program process opened up my eyes to the theory that was involved in coaching, like the pedagogical theory, athlete-centered approach, all the theory behind that stuff. And you know, I was privileged to listen to a lot of people, and they exposed me to a lot of coaches at a high level. And they were speaking, what they were talking about aligned with the theory I was reading as well. So it wasn't just me reading some academic journal going, actually, yeah, this sounds like a good way to do it. I was hearing it from a Houston Rockets assistant coach from the NBA because of this course, or through the Lithuanian Coaching Association. And that was another turning point for me that made me think, is there a better way to do it? And you know, I think I've been public enough it might be commonly known by some of the listeners, that somebody like Mark Bennett has had a massive influence on my coaching journey in terms of measuring the impact and the value of what I do. Like, you know, helping me to really step back and take a look at the bigger picture, and to really assess what value I'm bringing to another person's life, as well as their performance on the court, based on how I coach them, based on how I can influence them. And those three probably stand out more than anything. But I'll share one more story with you, Nick, if it's okay.
Sure.
I spoke about Esther already. She works in a school in West London. I was in that same school for about 9 to 10 years before I went into coaching full time. And she works with a lot of social and emotional needs of kids. So that she doesn't teach a subject. She's in there as a mentor, let's say. That's their title. And she has she does a far better job coaching these pupils than I ever do coaching athletes. And you talk about connection and relationships and being able to influence, it's fantastic. But somebody came into her office or their department one day, and Esther's colleague said, oh, what would Mr. Keane say about that? How would Mr. Keane deal with that issue? Whatever issue they were talking about. And this year 8 or 9 pupils, so what are we talking, 13 or 14 years old, went into character as if they were me. And they all had a joke and a laugh about it, but this kid portrayed me as somebody who was like, he went into character. So what was the character like? He started screaming and shouting, right, everyone down, do 10 push-ups, right, everybody on the baseline, you're running now. Like, he depicted that picture. They all had a good joke and a laugh about it. Esther came home and told me, and, you know, had a giggle about it. I'm sure I went pale going, my God, this is a real eye-opening moment. That's how I'm perceived by a 14-year-old who I don't even coach, who's not even on the school basketball team, but that's what they are seeing from the outside. And that was another pivotal moment that made me kind of step back and go, actually, I don't want to be that coach. I don't want to be perceived that way. And it's not about perception, but it gave me a little insight into what people see when they see me coach. And that married up with some other things. So I would say those 3 or 4 things were turning points, you know.
You can definitely see how they're going to kind of shift and evolve if that's not who you want to be. Huge impact. Andy, does any of that resonate with you? Any of those kind of key moments that have influenced and shaped you?
Yeah, I mean the third point that Alan was making around Mark and having a mentor or a coach developer. So I mentioned before that I've been through formal qualifications and have sort of been progressing on my journey in probably the same way as many other coaches would have. The pivotal moment for me was access to a coach developer. So it was part of the work that I was doing with the England junior stuff. But having a coach developer come in and I was fortunate that there was video and audio recording of what I was doing, but the questions that were asked, so as skilled practitioner, questions that I was asked in terms of why are you doing that? Why do you think that? How do these things link together? So just checking actually what were my reasons behind what I was doing. So that initial conversation and then the ongoing work was, I will always reflect back if people say, right, what's the most important part of CPD that you've had? That is it. So it was Bob Muir, Leeds Beckett. Some people may have seen or heard of him or seen his work. And what it enabled me to do was go beyond probably just the self-reflection stuff that I'd done previously. So picking up on some of the, we had Edgar Cope on our coach developer conversations on Friday, and we were talking about the limitations of self-reflection there, and actually having more reflective conversations with other people, and whether that is a skilled practitioner like Bob or just having more reflective conversations with others, possibly in your network, possibly within your work team, but genuinely engaging in why am I doing what am I doing? How am I doing what am I doing? What's informing that process? What's informing that practice? What else can I get? So that would be the pivotal moment for me, was start having someone plant the seed of curiosity around actually why is this, and then support me with it. And I suppose it's fine to have that formal coach developer, but I think what I've done since then is seek out other less formal people to do that as well.
Yeah, great. So if you're just listening to this now, it's worth kind of taking some of those moments and start to think about your own coaching journey and career as well. So, and again, feel free to throw in the chat box. What are those kind of moments that you've had that you've gone, okay, it's more than just the sport. It's more than the technical tactical that I need to start to engage in. So Andy, just kind of building on that, I'm interested to then know, and you might want to start to share how you went about kind of mapping that. How did you start to think about the people around you that you had at the moment, and then how you would start to explore that further?
Yeah, and I'll be quite honest here, probably linking back to your point at the start. I don't think I'd really gone through an actual process of doing that previously. So it was part of something we were exploring with work, getting some support around mentoring, and we were introduced to a process called, linked to systemic coaching. So having a look at the systems that operate in coaching. We're introduced to a process called constellations work. So almost using the way that the map of the stars might look to try and visually represent what your coaching and broader network might be. So I think we've got an example of the work that I did here. So this was me, apologies for the messiness, but this is me starting to myself map out what my network looked like. So you've got me in the middle, AB, you've got, and I'll try and talk you through some of the things that you're seeing here. So you've got different clusters of people. So you've got a blue hockey cluster, you've got a green coach developer world, you've got some bits in red to do with the Premier League, some bits in sort of turquoisey, the universities, and you've got a work network in black. You've got some different lines, so the ones that are scribbled a bit more, so hockey and work and into the CD world, that designates the strength of that relationship. You've also got people that are closer to me, so proximity again would say those are people that I have a lot of contact with. People who are possibly a dotted line, so top right hand corner, Dieter is the age group manager within hockey, so it's definitely a connection. It's less of a sort of a day-to-day hockey connection, but I would definitely be talking to him when I was working in that world. So it was one way of starting to have a look at, well, who are the people in my network, and how am I starting to almost quantify and clarify where they are, where the cross-working is. So there's a sort of a green line across the top of it that shows Mark sitting in two different parts of my network. And this is pretty much the start point. Map it out and then start to interrogate, actually, what does this mean? Because part of it might be, well, actually, how close am I to these people? Who's missing? One question you might ask yourself is, what type of support do these people give me? So do they all give me technical coaching support? So a question you might ask is, if I wanted to reach out to someone, if I was having a bad time in my coaching and I wanted some sort of support for myself, who would I go to? So you might find that your network is very technically heavy, and actually there might be some significant gaps in terms of people that look after you. So this would be the start point, and just in terms of mapping it out. So that's sort of how it links back to the stars bit. You might sort of create a constellation of the people that you have in your network.
Brilliant. Alan, have you done anything like this with your approach to understanding the people around you in lots of different kind of environments and spheres?
I have, but not in the form of. I really like that, Andy. It almost looks. It jumps out to me almost like a London Underground mapping system with you at the center. I think it's brilliant, and the dotted line almost represents the DLR. But no, that's really.
That doesn't
awesome.
mean anything to Andy because he's a northerner. Yeah,
I can get away with that one then. But
we have trams up here.
I think what I'm very clear on now, and it kind of goes back to your first question, Nick. What I'm very clear with is, like Andy touched off in a moment ago, in terms of the what, the how, the who, and the why of coaching. I'm very clear at this moment. Like at this moment in time, I'm doing two things. I'm really developing my tactical awareness for 5 years down the line, let's say. So I'm watching a lot of EuroLeague, Champions League type basketball, and I'm unpicking that type of stuff. And I've connected with 4 guys in particular to help me enhance this over this lockdown period. These 4, nobody else. And I'm picking these 4, stealing from these 4 in effect, actually. But also I've gravitated to two other guys. I've taken my national team staff on the journey with me, actually. I've gravitated to 2 other people who, actually 3, sorry, who I'm jumping on a call with once a week, let's say. It's very informal. And they're helping me with the who of coaching. Who am I as a coach? So they're still helping me to unlock that, because that's an ever evolving journey for me as I get older, a bit more mature. I'd like to think a little bit smarter. So I'm very clear about what aspect of the what, the how, the who, or the why that I'm in. And I'm at this current stage, I'm nowhere near the what and the how of technical detail, like technical actions of basketball. I'm not touching it, not going anywhere near it, because I don't feel the need to at this moment in time. I feel the need to develop the what and the why of a tactical situation at higher level basketball.
So I think that's a really interesting point there. So I think there's 2 things to note. One is the fact that you have a 5-year plan of, right, this is where I want to be in 5 years, which is superb. And then the fact that you've now selected 4 people that are going to support and help you on that journey towards that. So how did you choose those 4 people that you think these are the ones that are going to help?
You're going to laugh at me when I tell you how. I selected these 4 people via Twitter.
Okay. Oh, well, that's definitely a good mechanism. Yeah.
I won't laugh. And the reason being, no, I'm laughing myself actually, because it sounds somewhat cosmetic because of social media. It's such a stigma, isn't it? Twitter's awesome, by the way. But
absolutely,
these 4 guys have been sharing stuff on social media that's for me, it's a deeper level of thinking. It goes beyond the surface of a tactic, let's say. We're talking about the tactical element at the moment. It goes into more of the why and the who inside of your why. So what type of player you need in order to bring this action to life, let's say, in order to maximize and leverage the capability of this type of player, this type of tactic is effective. So they go into depth. So what I did on Twitter is the 4 of them, actually, I reached out, and we're probably going back a year now. This journey's been ongoing, to be honest, Nick. But it's come to life more in quarantine because we all have more time. So the Zoom calls have been more frequent. The actual testing of each other has been more frequent. It's not just a conversation. Like, we're out with the tactics board, it's here by my side by the desk and the marker, and we're testing each other. It's been brilliant. But those 4 I reached out to them on Twitter, private message on Twitter, a follow, private message. Have you got 30 minutes to give to me in the next 3 months anytime? Is there any time? And all these guys have been so giving in terms of connecting. So that's how it started. And then it kind of evolved. I guess we can unpick that in a moment. But I think we've kind of jumped ahead, though. I mean, if I'm listening to this webinar, I think, first of all, why would I do it? Why would I reach out to another person? And, I spoke to me and Andy and I were having a conversation last Friday. For me, I've got a genuine curiosity as well. Like, I'm really curious about what these guys know. And for me, with that genuine approach of curiosity to know more about what they know, it embeds itself more with me. I'm not doing it to tick a box, or I'm not doing it because, he coaches at the NBL in Australia, or he coaches in the Champions League. It's not for that. Like, to be honest, some of these Zoom calls I've had over the past 18 months, Nick, have been with really high profile people. And actually, if I was to rank them for what's had more impact on me, probably there's a bunch of them who coach at a lot lower levels. But it's what they're talking about and their depth of knowledge with a specific component actually adds more value to me at this moment in time. Like, I've had an NBA assistant coach on, and he's awesome. He's amazing. But actually, I've got something from a local coach here who shared something about his journey that actually resonated more with me at this particular time on my journey, So I think there's a few things inside there. I mean, we could probably go down a rabbit hole with some of those topics, but for me, it starts with the what, the how, the who, and the wow. And for me now at the moment, there's two aspects: the what, but it's specific to what too. But the who am I is coaching. There's 2 or 3 other coaches, or I think they're probably working more in coach development, where they're challenging me to really unbox who am I as a coach in this moment. And there's one particular coach, I will say, I call him a coach, but he's a social entrepreneur, I would describe him as. He's really got me to think about the wider impact that I can have on society through sport. And to be honest, Nick, I've been coaching 20 years and I've never gone in that direction. But a conversation with him in these past 2 months through a Zoom call has me really thinking about, like, what can I do on a basketball court that impacts these guys in the wider world? And he's asked me some really thought-provoking, deep questions. And it just stemmed from, actually, let me reach out to this guy in a Zoom call.
I mean, that really chimes. If anybody listened to the call last week with Mel Marshall, some of the work that she's doing with Adam Peaty as, the greatest swimmer of all time at 50, 100-meter breaststroke. And she's working with him on his higher purpose. What does he want to do? How does he want to impact the world as a person, as an athlete, and as a businessman? And she was telling me that Adam has been the driving force between the person that's got kind of these endless swimming pools, so almost something that the Olympic athletes can train with in their back garden, in every athlete's pool, so that they can keep doing it, because he wants to have an impact on other swimmers around him, because he knows that if he develops everyone else to be stronger, it creates a stronger person of him as well. And I think that's a really interesting thing, the fact that you've even started to consider and look at some of the things that aren't necessarily normal from I need someone to help me about coaching perspective. Andy, so from your constellations part, really, there, some of the things that Alan has talked about, what are the kind of gaps, or how might you then go about using a tool to identify some of those different things to maybe fuel some of your curiosity about why you might go about this?
Yeah, so I mentioned a bit around, who might be on the outlier of your diagram, and that, you might then start to have a think about how might I bring those closer. But there's a way that we probably look at, once you've mapped your network, is sort of interrogating a little bit or exploring it. And just in some of the prep that we've been doing here, some 3 quite good questions that can link into that in terms of really exploring what you've got in your own network. So, the way that you'd go about this, potentially sort of listing, right, well, who are these contacts? What are they, what are they represented? So on the left-hand side, you'd be just listing your different contacts in your network. And then actually starting to have a think about, well, who introduced me to that person? And you could be introducing yourself. So you might find that you're writing the word me down there quite a lot, or it could be somebody else. And then the third column is looking at, well, who have you introduced them to? So who are you playing a sort of a brokering or a connecting role there? Now, one of the articles that we'll share on Connected Coaches, a Harvard Business Review article, just talks about the echo chamber effect of how we grow our network. So if you're finding yourself, as in you're writing me down over about 65% of the time, so if you see lots of me's in that middle column, what you're tending to do is you're probably reaching out to lots of people who possibly are quite similar to you, and you're not really getting as much diversity in your network as you could be. So again, that's just being mindful of, how do I grow my network in different ways to try and get unique people into it, different people to yourself. How you go about that is an interesting one. So Alan mentioned around social media, so Twitter. So an example that we had, so we're trying to grow the coach developer family that we have at the minute. So those that are doing coach developer work, we're looking to try and grow that. And I connected with a lady on Twitter last week. She replied to something, it sort of grabbed my attention. I clicked on her profile and saw that she worked in coaching and mentoring. She'd done some stuff in triathlon and a variety of other sports. And then it was just a case of, right, well, I'll follow her. She followed me back, a direct message. I invited her to our group and gave a little bit. Here's a group that I think you'll find interesting. Would you like to come and join us? And she has done. So there's an element of, like, let's give something to this. I'm not just taking. So how can I add value as well as take value from a relationship? And we've spoken a lot when I was chatting to Alan before this conversation about how do we lead with curiosity and lead with the intent to actually learn from someone. That seems a bit more genuine. There'll still be a chance that someone's going to say no, or that you're not going to get a reply. But that's life, and you've got to roll with that. But unless you put yourself out there, so those questions I think are really interesting, just in exploring who you have in your network, and start to then think around, how did I connect myself to them? So what was the hook that got me in there? What was the question that got me in there? If it was introducing someone, introducing myself to someone at a conference, so some people might find, really struggle with networking at a conference, but what was it that sort of opened up that little door? And got me in. So what made that connection? What actually worked? So what's good for me? Because I think those are the bits when you remember, actually, that worked. How can I replicate that?
Yeah, brilliant.
Nick, can I add to that? Sorry, but can I just add to that slightly, because I think it's quite important. In terms of just to add on to what Andy said, really, from my experience, it's really got to start with recognizing who you are as a coach and what's your ideal. Like, what kind of coach do you want to be? So that'll point you in the direction you really need to go. Otherwise, we're just spreading ourselves out over a wide surface area. And I described it to Andy on Friday as you come back with a cosmetic experience of so many different things. So recognizing who is your ideal self as a coach, first of all, knowing where you currently are, like what's your baseline at the moment. And then I think you have to be very, very mindful that too much influence can interrupt who you are. Like, so this is who I am. This is my baseline. This is who I want to be as a coach. And now you got to be careful that there isn't too much influence on that, because you never reach that ideal. You go off on tangents and you take on board too many things too soon. Because, I talked about a moment ago, and Andy picked up on it there, that genuine curiosity for what somebody else knows, like, that's a really healthy thing. But it can also actually paralyze you or stunt your development, because to stay true to who I want to be and my purity and uniqueness as a person, as a coach, like, I can't be Nick Levitt. I can't be Andy when I coach. I've got to be Alan Keane. So I've got to be very careful that I don't try to take on bits and pieces of everybody and be somebody I'm not. So the challenge for me always was and still is, with all this information I'm taking in, with all these connections I'm making, from an NBA coach all the way down to a domestic coach here in the UK coaching under 16 club, like, what can I take from them and make it my own? I think Mark Bennett's a good example. Mark's been mentoring me for about 10 years. I'll never coach like Mark Bennett coaches, and he'll never coach like I coach, because my uniqueness is me and how I deliver stuff. Now, I will take stuff from him. I will take tools, concepts, principles, but I'll bring them to life the Alan Keane way, how it works for me. And the other thing as well, I think we have to be very, very, very mindful of, whatever you take from these other coaches, like I did a clinic last week for this international coaches clinic, and it was all about. They asked me to choose a topic, and I said, you know what, I'll deliver on stuff I've learned from other people. So the topic was 18 months of Zoom calls, what I've learned in this time frame, because that's how I've built up that network, if you want to say, my informal CPD. And I was very mindful to share in there. I've reached out to 52 people in 18 months. I think it's 52, 54 Zoom calls in 18 months. And I've been squeezing them in week to week while I'm at work. So we practice with the senior team at 6:30, but I've got a window between 4 and 6. So I'll plan a week ahead or 2 weeks ahead or sometimes a month ahead with a coach from Israel, and book him in for 4 to 5. And, they're giving it freely and it's informal CPD. But I have to go away from that and be honest with myself, right? Can what I learned in that hour from that Israeli coach have an impact on me as a coach and my coaching? Because if it's not effective and it's not going to have an impact, like I don't just throw it in the trash. I'll get something, but it may not be something that aligns to who I am as a coach, my uniqueness, my purity, and the journey I want to go on, my ideal version of myself as a coach. And I think you need to be mindful of that when you're entering this type of world,
Yeah, absolutely. And if I was to kind of, I guess, summarize that kind of first part of the discussion there, I think, you talked about it, have an understanding of yourself is crucial, and spend some time looking at how you go about doing that, and then start to think about where you want to go. So what that plan might look like. And then it's start to deliberately choose who might support you in that journey, but all coming from, well, what is it that I'm interested in? What is it in that person that I'm interested in? So that you can use that time, if you can connect with somebody, to ask really good, meaningful questions that is going to enable you to really listen to the answers that you can then, as Alan really neatly said, and I think that's really useful, that you can add to you, because like we can only become the best version of ourselves. And somebody earlier on, Ger, talked in the chat box about somebody calling him Coach Carter. Well, you can only be you, and trying to add the good bits, and you might disagree with some other bits of coaches, and you might hold people up in really high regard and just still not want some of them, but that's okay, because you have to start to mold that into you. So that would kind of be my summary, really, was understand you, start to have a plan about where you want to go, and then start to strategically look at that. But none of us start from a network of zero. We all have people around us, whether it's family, friends, professional people, colleagues, former colleagues, lots of different people that can support us on that we might already have in our network. So really start to spend some time and maybe use what Andy talked about earlier on as a bit of a hook to start to do that. And the next thing I think really that just kind of moving on is, if we've talked about, having, that mindset to approach it with a kind of a piece of curiosity, but how do you go about doing it? So we'll pick up the conference type real world piece in a bit, but because I'm definitely the person that is just rubbish in that kind of networking type environment. But social media, and I know you laughed at it, but I think it's a superb tool, because I'm like you, it's enabled me to connect with people all around the world that I never would have been able to do, and it's a lot kind of it's a softer way of doing it. But how do you go about making that first introduction? What's your plan? What's your tactics? Because often we contact people that we might see as rock stars in the coaching world, and let's get into the practical detail. What have you done, and how have you gone about doing that?
Are you asking me directly?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, mine would have started with, I go back to European Championship coaching 10 years ago. And someone told me, I'd been coached by American coaches when I was a player. And, their big thing was, when I went into coaching, I reached out to those guys, some of those guys, one in particular, and asked them for some advice. And he told me, look, get to know people, network, talk to coaches, build relationships, was part of his advice. And, I went to the European Championships my first time as an assistant coach. I try to make time every evening to speak to other coaches from other countries, just to get a taste of what they were doing. What was it like in their world as a national team coach? And also, were they doing anything that we could steal? So again, it came back from a curiosity of what they're doing that we could do that could add value to us. And the Aspire course, I did an Aspire course with you guys going back a few years. That was a great opportunity because I was suddenly in a room with netball coaches, football coaches, athletics coaches who I didn't have a lot of access to previously face to face, and listening to their stories and made me think, actually, I need to reach out to more non-basketball people because they're doing some amazing stuff. And there's no bias there with a basketball coach who's always done what he's always done. Let's say in our world, they were given a different perspective. So for me, it started at those European Championships. And what's that grown to be? I now make a beeline for the team we play. So if we play, I talked about Israel. Let's say we played Israel today. As soon as that game is finished and there's a bit of a rest period, or I see the coach that evening, I'm making a beeline for that coach to sit down, have a coffee, ask him, can I buy you a coffee, coach? And sit down and unpick actually how they scouted us. All of a sudden, we're having an in-depth conversation about how they beat us or how they prepared for us. And all of a sudden, there's a strong connection being built. Like all these coaches I've coached against from other countries, we're all accessible to each other now by WhatsApp or social media. But the other how is very simple, Nick, and you just talked about it. It's reaching out to guys at social media. But there's a domino effect. So if I give you an example, Chris Oliver in the basketball world is very much he has an online business that helps with a lot of technical, tactical stuff at basketball. So he'll have his membership portal and stuff. And he's got a podcast. And on his podcast, he'll have every level of coach to the highest level, NCAA Division I, NBA coaches. So with Chris, I reached out to Chris on social media. We built a relationship. We started talking about something that he was promoting. And not challenged is the wrong word. I asked him for more detail about it because I actually disagreed with it. And we got into a great discussion. Suddenly we exchanged numbers. Now, I was looking to connect with a Polish coach about a month ago who's coached at the Eurobasket for Poland. And I couldn't he's not on social media. So I reached out to Chris. Chris basically set up a WhatsApp group for me, him, and the Polish coach. Now, all of a sudden, I've got a formal connection there. Same with someone like Layson Perkins, who's connected with a lot of coaches around the world. He has connected to a lot of people. So, I know Andy talked about it a while ago, like who introduced you and then who have you introduced them to? So the third aspect of that one, like my national team staff at the moment, the assistant coaches and the team manager, anytime I do a Zoom call with one of these guys, I always invite them in. And it's 4 of us, it's 5 of us on the call. It's never just me and the other person. So I've taken them along the journey, which has allowed them then to go away and build a relationship without me. So Ian McLeod, for example, I introduced him to an Australian coach, assistant coach. I recently found out that Ian was actually, through that assistant coach, connecting to other Australian head coaches. And I was saying, Ian, you never invited me in this conversation. You just had an hour with the national title winning coach in Australia, and you never. So I'm being playful, but my message is, it's easier than we think, and I think it's almost like you're afraid to ask a rock star for his autograph. What's the worst that can happen? Like say, Nick, you're very prevalent on social media. You share a lot of good stuff, and maybe 10 years ago I would have been like, oh, I can't reach out to him. He's got 30,000 followers and he's really busy and he's working in the FA football. Or I look at somebody like Mark Bennett and say, no, he's working with Cleveland Indians. Who am I? I work in a small club in the local league. But actually, what's the worst that can happen? That nobody replies to you? And I've had that as well. Like I've had that this week. I'm trying to get hold of someone this week. I know that they have probably a business aspect of it where it could be very expensive to get them on a call, but I'm trying. And I'm going in there with an authenticity and a genuine curiosity for just 30 minutes, 20 minutes of their time. And that never ends up being 20 minutes, by the way. It ends up being 2 hours, 90 minutes. And you get off the phone call, you get off the Zoom call, and it's actually very refreshing for them as well.
And I love the point that you made earlier of, I think you said, you'd reach out and say, have you got 30 minutes you can give me in the next month? You're not saying, I need it now, because you're understanding how busy or pressured other people might be, and kind of setting up that so that it can be flexible is a really cool way of doing it. Andy, what do you make of some of the points that Alan just made then?
Yeah, I mean, definitely connect with a lot of them. The domino effect bit links to some of the, I used the phrase broker or connector earlier. The domino bit is who by linking with someone who does that then enable you to access in terms of their network and possibly talking about that. Linking back to your the first bit of the conversation around social media. I think it's a really interesting one. How do you go about that? I mean, obviously doing a little bit of background. So, unless you connecting with people that you don't necessarily know or what's in their profile. So I'm mindful on my profile. Yeah, I've got something around coach developer work with UK coaching, but also something around hockey. If someone sees me and they've not come across me before, their curiosity might be piqued by either one of those two things. But then you connect with someone, then you possibly look at, well, who do they follow? So who are some other interested people? So going down that little rabbit hole of, right, well, they're interesting. That's someone who I might want to connect with. Who else is interesting there? And then that domino of looking me into finding someone that you may never have intended to find initially, but you've gone through a process there. Similarly, sort of you mentioned conference. Well, whenever we get back to actually having physical conferences, but doing your background, who's on the invite list? Who do I actually want to go and search out at this conference? So there might be some serendipitous, I bump into someone and then make a connection there, but actually, am I going to target someone to say, I need to have a conversation with this person? So go about it a bit more focused, and possibly linked to Alan's point around actually, who am I going to target on social media? So if it's a team with a coach of a particular style that I want to learn more about, then, well, I'll find that person. I'll say, well, that's why I'm interested. I want to develop my game in this way, this way, this way. I see, from what I've seen, you're really doing this great work. So that's where my curiosity goes.
Yeah, one of the things I was kind of looking at around the conferences and some of the key things around that is it's exactly that point that Andy made. It's read about the person. Don't get caught up on the session title that they might be delivering. What is it about them that makes the interesting aspect about why you go and speak to them? And then, don't worry too much about making a good first impression, but just worry more about not making a bad first impression. I think sometimes, not understanding them, and like Alan said, that about the busyness of people and just not having kind of any kind of respect for that is important. And also sometimes I think one of the things that I found, and Andy and I were talking about this earlier on, we read some different academic things here and there, and people are like, well, how do you get access to that? It's behind a paywall, you've got to buy it. Just email the author, and just say, look, that sounds a really cool paper. It's really interesting. Is it possible you could share it? And I've never, in hundreds of articles, I've never had somebody go, well, you're going to have to pay the £35. People generally are quite happy with their time, and I think that's where the fascinating conversations kind of happen. One of the kind of the summary points that I picked up from reading something else was there was three things around that kind of interaction and networking piece. Was try not to dismiss people, kind of treat everybody as important, and try and strike up interesting conversations. Although they kind of phrased it slightly differently, but don't be a douche about it. If someone's going to ask for something, there's no need to be rude with how you kind of have those interactions. But also don't rush. It might not be, I might reach out to Alan and catch him at a really bad time that I don't know that he's going to a game and it's just a really bad time. But maybe follow it up and, try a different time, but don't rush it and just kind of really push people away. So it's a really interesting discussion, but the how, I think, and how you go about doing that is really important. But ultimately, everybody's just another human, I think, and generally, if you can take some of Alan's points there, and it's a really good opportunity, I think, to start to grow your network, but in an intended way. So it's a deliberate plan on how you're doing it.
Yeah, Nick, just on that, I would, so sometimes we talk about networking. Some of the bits of reading I was doing prior to this was just thinking, you're genuinely looking to connect with someone, not necessarily just network with them. So how do you make that connection will be, moving into sort of the social capital piece. Actually, how do I share experiences? How do I share some stories from my world that might connect with you, so that you're starting to build a little bit, you're starting to create a friendship. I mean, reading at some of the examples that are coming through in the chat box now, that initial connections have ended up leading to 15, 20 years relationships with people that I'm sure started talking about coaching, but have developed into something bigger and broader. And how you go about doing those things might link you into some conversations with people that you would never normally connect with. So I know we spoke earlier about Danny Kerry from hockey, head coach of the men's team. He shared at a recent event that we organised that he's just joined a group of he does cycling, so he's joined a cycling group, and he has conversations with those guys cycling that are just very, very different from his coaching world, and possibly then make connections into their worlds that are just you wouldn't really expect before. And it was something that came out of one of the articles we were reading that we've shared around actually shared activity. So you could go out for a bike ride as an activity that you're doing, but if you join a bike club, then you suddenly start to you have an immediate network of people that you can build relationships with that might be a lawyer, an accountant, or just in a completely different walk of life. That then you may well build a connection with them that you never really intended. So that shared activity angle of how do you bring new people into your network is really interesting.
Yeah, I certainly know from playing football, and as you certainly get older, and everybody ends up having trades of different descriptions. A lad I played football with is an electrician, so one of those links is you get stuff done on your house for free. So hey, it's the beauty of networks. It seems a great time now to throw it out. So if there's any questions, please throw them in the chat box on the right hand side there. And just as we start to wrap up, there's a couple of interesting things. So just to try and be nice and succinct with this, we'll start with you, Alan. What's the best mistake you've made?
The best mistake I've made. Great question, by the way. And I'm going to steal this question on my Zoom calls, and I'm going to quote you on it. I'll reference you the first time, but then it's going to be mine. Is that a deal?
I'll send you an invoice.
The best coaching mistake I've made is probably what we've talked about already. I don't regret, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't regret gathering up every drill I could find, sweeping up every tactic, trying to do. I don't regret that. I think that's been the best thing that's happened to me, because like I said to you early on in this conversation, I think you have to go through that phase to come out of that phase and then do it better. So the best mistake I've ever made is actually going through that process. And it's I'd like to change your question to what's the best opportunity you have made? And the best opportunity was getting it wrong early on. And you could probably say that with anything to do with coaching, but early on I tried to gather and hoard everything I could find. And that's helped me to learn the hard way now, because I've experienced and felt what it was to do that and the value or the lack of value in doing that.
Cool. Andy, best thing for less than £30 that's influenced your life, personal or coaching?
An AeroPress coffee maker.
Okay.
So you look at the amount of coaching trips that I've been on. So I do need a little bit of coffee to get me going in the morning and then throughout the day for certain, probably even more so now with little people running around. But, there are any number of occasions where you've been staying somewhere. So I recall a camp over in Holland and being able to look at the tulips out of the window and be able to say, right, well, the coffee machine's not working, but I can make myself a high quality coffee in my room. That's crucial for me. So you don't have to rely on other people. You've got it. So that will go with me wherever I coach now, wherever I develop coaches, your own coffee maker.
Brilliant. And just going to pick up one of the questions in the box there on the right. Alan, what are the areas outside of sport that's influenced your coaching?
Areas outside of sports, involving other people, actually. My family relationships have really influenced my coaching, because there's some theories and practices. Look, for example, Stephen Rowlick, motivational interviewing, which you guys will be versed on.
Yeah, what a guy.
There's a guy I reached out to that we now talk once a week. Who would believe that? I read a book, thought this guy was amazing. I thought he was a rock star. Yeah, he is a rock star. And I reached out to him on social media, and we're having 1 hour a week on Zoom. I probably shouldn't say that. You'd be bombarded now. But, he's I look at stuff he's done, like, you talk about the ORS principle and all that stuff, and I think about my interactions with my stepsons and my partner Esther, and I think, I use those concepts in the real world. I think about, Mark Bennett's principles, the PDS, and I've used those principles in the real world with management, with owners, with relationships, with friends. And, those type of things, I guess I'm bringing it back to the coaching world, but practicing stuff in the real world that has helped me with my coaching, believe it or not. And helped me probably is being harder than actually coaching using principles and practices with players. But I would say Stephen Rownick has helped me a lot, actually, and he's away from the coaching world. Like, he'll tell me all the time, and I'm sure he's not worried about insulting me. He tells me he knows nothing about basketball. All he thinks is crazy to, a group of guys running around trying to throw a ball through a hoop. He thinks it's insane, definition of insanity. But, like, he's helped me loads to unpick different things like relationships and connection and how to do it quick and succinctly. But it adds value, and it's authentic and it's genuine. But it's yeah. So those, I would say, people have helped me away from coaching with many things like that, probably cross over into sports and real world life.
So just Stephen Rolnick, that's the guy. He's got a great book on the importance of conversations and motivational interviewing. It's well worth a read, and neither Alan nor myself are on commission for that, but it's an excellent book, and he's a hell of a guy. And even like so, in the right hand side there, Lee Nicholas, just thrown in there. Look, been brave right from the start. If you want to connect with him, but equally what he's done is he's given you his email address, and if you feel like connecting around some of those topics, get in touch with Lee. So we're bang on the hour mark now, and I think if I wanted to say anything, I think really the slide that was put up before, just about making sure you kind of explore your networks, identify the kind of different people and things within them, examine what you've got at the moment before you can then look to build and grow, but intentionally taking on some of the real principles and methods and practices that Alan and Andy talked about. Definitely make sure that you do that as a task and find yourself a bit of time, a bit of space to do this. Next week coming up, we have it's going to be a fascinating topic, all about parents in sport, what this looks like, how do we go about developing those relationships. But during the week, we have some communities of practice taking place that Marianne and Tom, two of our other coach developers that work with Andy, will be leading. So again, feel free to get involved in them. They're a lot more interactive. You can really get into some of the discussion and ask lots of questions in a different way than a forum with 80 odd people on now. It's structured in a different way to really make sure that you can start to engage. But next week's session, a real hot topic. I don't know any sport that doesn't have challenges with working with parents in different ways, whether that's elite sport or grassroots sport or physical activity in a different way. So feel free to have a look at that. Loads of information on the website as well to support developing your network. But again, just do what Andy and I did. Google it, talk about it, getting somebody like Alan to have a conversation with, because he's done his own stuff, and all of that will have helped my own learning as much as it will have done yours. So thanks for everybody. Stay safe, do everything that you need to. Make sure you look after yourselves in this random period. Andy, thanks very much. UK coaching staff, and Alan, if you could stay on, that would be brilliant. And Alan, just like to give Alan a very big thank you as well for giving up some time today. But everybody else, feel free to log off. Thanks very much. Have a good time. We'll see you next week. Alan, if you've just got a few minutes afterwards, this is where we live the plan, do, review process for us, and we have a few moments with everybody after.
I'll share my book. They've got books out to share.
Oh.